K-pop fever hasn't cooled off. Global demand is still growing, with K-pop related sales generally doing well. But lately, there has been a decrease in sales of music albums. Today, we want to analyze this shift with Jeff Benjamin, a K-pop expert and contributor to Billboard, Forbes, Rolling Stone, and more. Hello, Jeff.
Hello, Jeff.
Hey, Al.
Hi. So, Jeff, let's talk about these figures released earlier this month, which showed that K-pop album sales last year declined. I mean, there was a slight rise in album exports by 0.5%, but not a really big, significant rise. So what caused this general drop?
Yeah, I think it's important to look at this in sort of the larger context of where album sales had been going up to this point, right? So naturally, in 2020, we all remember the unfortunate COVID-19 pandemic. And, this was a time when it wasn't just that fans couldn't see an artist, do live performances or go on tours. Artists and fans were, completely kept away from one another. There was no contact or no interaction at all. So that really kind of led to fans who, might have had disposable income, who weren't going to tours or, had saved money in that point. They could instead, buy more albums in that point or find different ways to connect with their favorite artist. And this has created a huge trend that we saw specifically in the COVID-19 times of online fan signs and fan calls, where fans would purchase an album and then they'd get the chance to maybe talk with their artist or have a FaceTime phone call or be able to talk with them through video chat. There were all these kind of options that previously weren't available to global fans. So when we're talking about K-pop album sales, the Gaon chart in particular, it is counting global sales, right? So we're looking at fans at a global way. Fans in 2019 or 2020 rather through 2024, they were getting more chances to meet artists, but we don't have those same kind of issues anymore. Touring is up, like we said, more artists are coming out. So it's not that I think album sales declining is necessarily, it's not a good trend per se, right? But thinking about everything in context, we don't, necessarily need to have those huge surge of album sales that we had at a time, simply just because, fans have more ways to interact with artists once again.
And personally, what's your assessment of this change?
Yeah, I think, to be realistic, I think, you guys I think you can see it in the back here. I love physical albums. I love a paper product, but let's be realistic, right? Many people are not buying the album to physically play the music, right? We are streaming it on streaming services or watching it on YouTube, but instead an album is it's a part of your fandom, right? And while an album, definitely has a purchase and a price to it, ultimately artists and entertainment companies are going to be able to make more from their fans and more from consumers at something like a live tour or a live show, where not only tickets are more expensive, but you're able to buy merchandise. It helps the venues. There might be different perks you can buy. I think all of this is kind of part of a healthy music industry. I think the album sales, the huge, amazing numbers that we were seeing from artists like 17 and BTS and just all these, Stray Kids, huge numbers, 5 million albums in sales. I think that was, it almost wasn't fair to almost keep up that standard, because moving forward, it just was never going to be able to sustain it at that level, just thanks to eventually the world coming back to the way it is. So I think ultimately things are still healthy, even though there has been some changes with the fan signs changing. China sales have definitely changed. There's not as much bulk buying happening from China. But ultimately, I don't see any huge red flags for the industry at large.
We're going to get into details later on again. But Jeff, first off, you just mentioned the COVID-19 pandemic. So after the pandemic, people are going to concerts again. So last year, K-pop idols were more active overseas than ever before, resulting in a surge in K-pop concert sales. So can we say that the K-pop market is still growing? And what is the connection between the decrease in album sales, whereas we're seeing the increase in concert sales?
1000%. Yeah, I think specifically when we were talking about album sales being down, domestic sales for K-pop in Korea, right, are down a bit. So it kind of makes sense that there would need to be some makeup, some money made up from going overseas to maybe where album sales are proving to be a bit more hotter. But ultimately, right, even though album sales are definitely indicative of a healthy musician, artists whose fans are not only buying the music but supporting them, loving them in that way, I think touring is almost like the next step, right? It's one thing to passively listen to music or stream music or pick up an album, and display it on a shelf or something. But when you go out to a tour or you end up buying, a light stick or a t-shirt at a concert and you're engaging with the, communities, the different fans around there, the artists themselves, that's kind of like a whole nother level of engagement. And I think all these things are ultimately quite healthy to where the industry is going.
And so could we say that fans' perception of album purchases is changing as well?
I hope so, because I think sometimes we can get so tied into the numbers, I mean, don't get me wrong. I love the charts. I'm a big chart person. I love looking at, I love when different artists break different record sales. And generally speaking, if someone sells 4 million albums instead of 5 million albums, that's still a huge success, right? None of these artists are completely tanking in ways that, should cause for concern. I think, yeah, the idea of an album purchase, if your favorite artists aren't hitting those huge milestones that they did in their last comeback, be gracious, be gentle, because I really don't think it's as indicative of artists, completely falling off, but rather, just kind of the way the industry is evolving right now.
Right. I mean, I have become a bigger K-pop fan in the recent years, but I have to admit I'm not buying as much as albums like I did when I was, a student in the past.
Yeah.
And also we want to mention some attribute the downward trend actually to the hiatus of K-pop giants like BTS and BLACKPINK, right?
Right, but BTS and BLACKPINK are set to return in the second half of this year, which everyone's looking forward to. So how much of an impact do they have on these sales of albums?
Well, they are leaders in a huge way. I mean, especially BTS, just leaders not only just in terms of sales, in terms of, getting greater attention on K-pop, but also, helping pave the way for more artists to get more opportunities to get their albums in stores or in big retailers. I know if it wasn't for BTS, I don't think we still probably wouldn't have K-pop albums in stores in America. So I'm very grateful for them. But I think, in particular, artists like BTS and BLACKPINK, definite leaders, not just of their generation, but of sort of, this next generation K-pop wave still to this day. When they come back and when they're releasing music, they are kind of, it's like the phrase, a rising tide lifts all ships, that, they kind of bring increased visibility to, the entire scene, the entire industry. So, as long as they come back and as long as, everything is, squarely in place, I do think we're going to kind of see some ticks up in the industry because naturally if people are comfortable, they know BTS, they know BLACKPINK, they might, be interested to check out, a related video on YouTube, or they might, want to buy another album that they see next to them. There's so many ways to connect. And when you have a huge artist like that, it's very important. So I'm super excited, not only to have these great artists back, but also just see, where they take their impact next.
Let's see how the figures will look for 2025. But Jeff, it does look like it's kind of difficult now to draw a correlation between K-pop growth and record sales from here on. So are we expecting any changes in the K-pop industry based on that?
Yeah, what I would really encourage, and it's something that is definitely changing right now, but it's something I had to change my mindset with. But if you look at the biggest albums, sort of like in the world, regardless of genre, they not only have very strong physical sales, but they also have very high streaming numbers, right? So people are not only purchasing the album for whatever to play in their cars, for their fandom, to display on their bookcase, whatever, but they're also constantly going back to these albums and streaming them and kind of really engaging with them in ways that show that they're being more of an active listener than just simply purchasing it once and then keeping it on the shelf and maybe never looking at it again. So I look at someone like Rosé from BLACKPINK, who has had huge success, right, with her single the App Batu song with Bruno Mars. That has been a huge hit around the world and in streaming, but it's really kept her album going and kept interest in her solo album Rosie really high. And it's kind of allowed people to take more interest in the other songs that don't, might not have a commonly known artist like Bruno Mars on the album. So her singles like Toxic Till the End and Number One Girl are kind of getting an additional boost, and it's kind of helping the album project at large to really keep people entertained. The album, I don't think, has fallen under the top 50 in the first 10 weeks it's been out on the Billboard 200. So people are going back to this album, going back to the singles, and I think that's a sign of just a really healthy album. So when we're talking about changing perceptions, yeah, maybe it doesn't need to be just about how many purchases and how many products did you buy, but rather what's the overall activity look like? How much streaming did it get in addition to the album sales?
So it's probably not anymore about the format of the music, but just having that quality music, that quality K-pop music continue to grow around the world and spread. So thank you very much for your insights, Jeff, today.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you, guys. See you soon.
See you next time. And thank you, Walter. We're going to see you back here tomorrow.
See you tomorrow.